Hello and welcome to tonight's very important broadcast. My name is Julia and I'm from Insight Media, and it's very good to be back after a little break. Now, I'll just get everyone to get their videos back on. Now, tonight we are broadcasting something which is I see as something incredibly important, because we're going to be talking about a significant court case that is happening here in Australia, where a small number of individuals have been charged by being part of an international child trafficking syndicate, where the charges basically is where apparently these individuals were trafficking children from Western Australia with a boat. Now, after this court case, I think originally, as Graham has mentioned before that we went live, this incident actually started about 9 years ago, and now it's been in legal matters for the last, I believe, 5 years or so. And so after all a lot of information has been coming out, and when we talk about also we'll talk about some of the disclosures as well from the children. And what it's actually showing is that there is some serious issues in our family court system, in child protection services, in as well as the Australian Federal Police. But as we unpack the information tonight to share with the public, I'm really honoured and so pleased to see these individuals joining me tonight. And I'd like to introduce first Dee McLaughlin, who's an investigative journalist from Gumtree News and also a film director. We've got Sir Graham Bell as well, and Pastor Paul Burton, who I've previously had on the show, who's also been individually involved in over 150 cases directly with helping and assisting families that have had their children taken away from them. So welcome, guys, and how's everyone going?
All good, thank you, Julia, and thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Good.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So perhaps we should start by talking about the actual alleged offences from the start. I think that'd be a good way to sort of introduce people to this court case and what's actually been happening. Yeah. Now, I've got a list of the offences, and hopefully I've got them all correct. So please correct me if I am wrong.
I think, if I was not mistaken, I think there was something like 28 charges originally, weren't there, Graham? And something like 21 of them have been dropped now.
Yeah, that might be a good place to start. Look, and get into what happened after. But they charged him with nonsense charges. They charged Dr. Pridgeon, for example, with one of his charges was dealing in the proceeds of crime. They pointed out he didn't have one shred of evidence, or not one zack that he had was unlawfully obtained. So they changed that to dealing in more than $100,000 intended to be used in the commission of an offence, the Commonwealth charge. And to get that, there was 2017, they alleged that he sold, my little grandson's going to be playing and mucking up with it.
That's all right.
But I'll talk a bit later. He's just having fun. In 2017, they alleged that he sold $70,000 worth of gold bullion. And in 2018, they alleged he bought a yacht for 30-odd thousand. So they had to connect those together over 2 years to get the 100,000. Bubba, can you go down there and play one? I'll keep going.
Sorry, we can hear you fine, Graham. That's all right. Keep going.
Just play it. Yeah.
That's all right.
So they had to connect those two amounts in 2 different years to get to the 100,000. But the 70,000 was alleged to be sold in New South Wales, and the yacht was alleged to be purchased in Western Australia. So they actually had to form the charge. They actually had to have 2 different types of assets. Yes, the people here. Yes, good boy. 2 different types of assets, 2 different modes of dealing with the assets, buying and selling, and 2 different states, which we pointed out, none of which was Queensland, where they was taken into committal. And so we raised Section 80 of the Constitution. They kept that going for 18 months, put 2 QCs on it, knew they couldn't win it. and dropped it on the day of the committal. They also charged him with child stealing. All of these people, not just Russell, Patrick and Anne, but the other 4 or 5 people as well.
This is 3 children that we're talking about specifically. Is that correct?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And Anne, how I got involved, Anne rang me up one night. She'd spent all the money. I said wasted. Spent all the money on lawyers. She rang me up one night. She was charged with child stealing. I heard the story. She had lawful custody of the child. And so what I said to her, she said, they tried to transfer me to Brisbane from Townsville. And I said, look, submit this to the court. She said, at the time, she said, you think it'll work? I said, no, I don't think it'll work, but it'll buy us some time. And what I was claiming was that there had never been a case mounted against her because the only people ever prosecuted it was the Commonwealth people, but it was a state charge. And my allegation was they didn't have it in writing permission from the Attorney General. I didn't know whether they did or not. As it turns out, they didn't. She submitted that to the police on a Friday. She submitted it at 6 o'clock to the CDPP by email. And Monday at 6 o'clock, they withdrew that charge. They then charged her with conspiracy to defeat justice, which all the others were on, brought her up into Queensland with people she'd never met, had nothing to do with. They charged them all with child stealing. And so I told Russell to challenge that on the grounds that there was no evidence of force or fraud. They argued that and said, well, the fraud was in changing their hair colour, changing their names. There's the fraud, right? And I said, no, if you read the Act correctly, the force or fraud has to be in the taking. So, for example, someone goes to a school and says, I'm little Johnny's uncle, but he's not, right? That's fraud. Or he goes to the school and grabs him, dragging and kicking out. That's force, but it's got to be connected to the actual taking. So they dropped all of those for everybody, and they charged him with harbouring. I said, well, you've got to put a submission in for that because the charge is actually harboured a child so taken. So it's subsection 363, subsection B. So taken means taken in the manner of subsection A. So I said, you still have to prove force or fraud. You have to prove those children were harboured after they were taken by force or fraud. They went to committal on that. They got them committed on that, but they never pursued those. One of the men who was represented, and the lawyers never said a word about it. I don't know why. I can quote you what the magistrate said when he committed him. He said, stand up, Mr. O.D. You are charged that at Grafton in the state of New South Wales, you did publish an account of proceedings contrary to Section 121 of the Family Law Act. And further, you are charged that at Grafton, New South Wales, you did use a carriage service to menace, harass and offend. How do you plead? He says, not guilty. He said, you're committed. Now, people might say, what's wrong with that? Well, it was a Queensland court. The last time I looked at a map, Grafton was in New South Wales. Right? So they got committed on, basically the charges they're committed on. Everybody is committed. Everyone except Dan is committed on 2 conspiracy charges. They're charged with conspiracy to defeat justice in relation to the twins. And then all of them plus Anne is charged in relation to her grandchild with the same charge. And then Patrick is charged now, not with one carriage service charge that he was committed on and not with one publishing charge that he was committed on, but 3 of each. And the charge now has been changed from that what was committed to at Queensland and elsewhere. And now in conjunction with this other man, that wasn't mentioned at committal. So they changed the state to try to get around Section 80 of the Constitution. And they're stating, and people might think, you're making this up. No. Their submission in regards to our submissions to them is that the evidence of Queensland is because the internet exists there. They admit that they don't have any evidence of anyone viewing it in Queensland. They admit that he was searched in New South Wales. He was arrested in New South Wales. He was charged in New South Wales. The other bloke who pleaded guilty, who was also in New South Wales for arrest charge, and he went to court in New South Wales. He went to prison in New South Wales. But because they've got him up in Queensland, they've changed it from the committed charge, which was at Grafton, to in Queensland and elsewhere. It's just bizarre.
The whole thing, Julia, is a disaster. It's been 5 years in the courts, and you've never seen anything like it. I mean, Deal elaborate on it, but this, I think, as I explained to you before, for people that are not aware, this was a group of people, like 2 South Africans, and then a bunch of other family members, parents and grandparents, effectively running to flee to protect their children from allegations of sexual abuse, shocking allegations of sexual abuse, the twins and Anne's grandson. I've seen one of those testimonies from that child, and I believe that child. So you've got a situation here where, even if it was found out that that information wasn't true, I believe the children, and I think any decent, reasonable human being would. But even if it were found to be untrue, any parents or people that are trying to protect the children from what they believe is a risk of harm, it should not be treated as a criminal offence. The very fact that this government treats people with criminality for trying to protect children is an insane proposition that I face, as well as Russell, in my own matters. And this is the thing I think is most distressing, that the Australian public's not aware of, that this is going on continually. The family court do this kind of thing all the time. So this is a federal police matter, this case, but we see continual cases in family courts where children are returned to sexual predators when they've been identified. We're seeing the same thing in children's courts between the state and families, when the state governments and territory governments remove children, that these children are often put into much higher risks of harm. And we've just seen just one abomination after another. These courts are clearly failing these children across the board.
And not only that, Paul, but not only that, sorry, Dee, I just quickly add, not only that, when you show the courts the level of corruption, they put their heads down like that.
Yeah.
The prosecution puts their heads down, they'll go quiet. And we've shown them all. Chief Justices, Presidents of the Courts of Appeal, Judges of the District Court, that... Yes, Bob?
I want some tea on.
Okay, she's going to get them. The grandmother actually took her grandchild to the police because he alleged abuse. She didn't know that he'd alleged this to other people as well. The police came out and told her that the boy didn't disclose and she was wasting their time. The police went to the family court and sought orders that she never be allowed to bring the child back without permission of the independent children's lawyer, on the grounds that the child never disclosed. They got those orders. After they charged her, he reiterated that in the bail court. He admits he did it. We got it in writing. 2 years later, an officer from the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecution's office quit his job, and before he quit it, he placed the disc of the interview in the evidence file and sent it out to the accused, and the child clearly disclosed, so much so that a DPP, an ex-DP solicitor from New South Wales in private practice, wrote a letter to them and stated that he would have charged and did charge on disclosures such as that were very clear disclosures, yet they've told the court they didn't disclose, he didn't disclose, and everyone can see it, and we keep saying it, and they don't even reply to it in the submission. They just ignore this.
The grandmother also, if I'm correct, she had sole custody of this little boy.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Court-ordered custody. Court-ordered
custody.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, at the time, yeah. So
Yeah,
there was no stealing of anything.
Julia, it's actually quite hard. I think it's quite hard for the audience to imagine tens of thousands of protective parents being criminalized. And this case is like the canary in the mine. So we can see what's happened in this case very, very clearly. There were 40 mandatory reports of abuse.
From the children, or?
Written by report writers, psychologists, or whatever,
Right.
written about the abuse, disclosed about, that the children disclosed. And the courts act against this. Now, we see this all the time. We see the corruption, and it's known in the children's courts, children and youth courts. If you come forward and discuss abuse as a protective parent, beware, you might lose your kids.
You will.
In a flash. You will lose your kids. And there are tens of thousands of people. And, I'm just going to give a little bit of history. Nothing has changed in Australia. Australia is the most despicable court place that you can imagine. In 1877, there was a recent, when Grant Denyer was on that show, Who Do You Think You Are? He found out that his great-great-great-grandfather had lost his wife. His wife died, and so he just took the eldest daughter and claimed her as his sex toy. And the daughter eventually, out of frustration, burnt a haystack down, and the case went to the Supreme Court. The daughter had given birth to a 6-year-old child from her own father, and the Supreme Court goes, "Oh, we're jailing the daughter for destruction of property," and he walks free. That is what happens in this country. Nothing has changed since the Salem witch trials. It's absolutely despicable. And here we have, I mean, I can't even believe we're discussing this, that we've got three or four of the most, the people that should be getting medals, the Order of Australia, they should be getting Orders of Australia, but they were originally charged for child stealing. What is wrong with this country? I mean, I've just written an article. I think these judges are mentally ill. They're either mentally ill or they're controlled by a pedophilic cult. There's no other option. You can't come to that conclusion, to the conclusions where, where corruption is accepted, if you're not mentally ill or you're not under control. I mean, I don't know what you think, Paul Graham, but that's my conclusion.
I think they're controlled, but I think it's a spiritual controlling as well, because 3,000 years ago, they were burning the children to Moloch to get financial benefit. They were ordered by the God of the Bible to cease doing it. And what they're doing now is they're burning children to Moloch for financial advantage, but they're just doing it. They're not actually putting them in the flames now. They're just, what they're doing now is probably worse, at least in the flames, they're dead quick. It's a spiritual thing, and this corruption has just gone all the way through. And this Noetic, I would estimate, I think probably 30 or 40 million or more has been spent on it. It's run for 9 years. They just simply don't care about the legal issues. We've had some successes. So we had all of those charges dropped. After it was committed, now people may not believe this, I'm going to go out on the limb and say it anyway. They tried to present the indictment. We successfully objected to it. They came back to try to present the indictment. We intended to object. I think from memory, it got sidetracked and they didn't present it. An hour or two later, they went to a different court. It was presented. We complained that they shouldn't have presented it without the parties being present. I certainly wasn't on the phone listening. It was an hour or two later. I never knew about it. All of the people said we weren't there. They sent us a sound recording of them being there saying, yes, we're present, and I don't believe they were. I simply don't believe they were present. I believe the sound recording has their voices on it, and it's their voices, but it's not from that. I think it's from a previous hearing. I think they've doctored it. Nobody cares about the Attorney Generals, the Governor Generals, the politicians, the media. It doesn't matter where you go, and you can show them what's wrong with this case. Now we then challenged. I said you got to test the course of justice because you're charged with conspiracy to defeat the course of justice. So we asked the question whether the course of justice was even running at that time, and we got a ruling, and it appeared that she was going to rule completely in our favour and throw the indictment out. And when she came back, she mixed up the parties' names. She got Anne mixed up with another woman. She appeared nervous, and she did rule in our favour, but she left it open that the course of justice could be running in a very, very limited way in regards to a future possible contravention proceeding. Just before that, what I said to them, and this is what we're dealing with, you got to understand what we're dealing with here. This is your money. And
a massive amount of your money. I mean,
I said they've never given particulars. They need to give particulars. So they wrote back and said, we gave you particulars, 17 pages of it. And I said, tell them that they're facts. They're not particulars, they're facts. And they wrote back, they're not facts, they're particulars, that's all you're getting. So we went to court and argued that, and the judge ruled that they weren't particulars, they were facts. They had to give the particulars. So once they gave the particulars, I said, now challenge the course of justice. So we did, we won. So then they had to change the particulars. So they can just change and say, well, we're no longer alleging you did that. After 9 years, now we allege you did this instead.
Yeah, they keep changing the goalposts as they move along. Like we're nearly 5 years in, and they're changing the criteria of what they've been charged with.
Paul, can you please just talk a little bit about how much money is actually being made per child, depending on whether they are, I think you said once, you know, if they're...
Look, there's different criteria. So we're talking about a family court case here, or, you know, extension of a family court, which is there's two things going on. On the federal family court level, you've got children being taken from one parent given to another in that kind of thing, and there's a whole bunch of things going on around that. Then you've got the children's courts or youth courts, which is the children being removed by the state. The best place to get information on that, I found, is actually the Productivity Commission. There's a website link I can send to that. But I mean, it's interesting because when you start investigating the money with child removals, it makes sense. And I did actually, funnily enough, pull something up while you were just talking before. But this is from the Productivity Commission, one paragraph. And this is actually to do with out-of-home care placement for children. But it says, the cost per placement for nights in care services should be considered in conjunction with the expenditure on care services per child and by placement type. The annual cost per child in care as of the 30th of June 2021 varied across jurisdictions, so in the states and territories, ranging between $60,408 per child and $128,918 per child in each state and territory. In jurisdictions where data were available, annual costs were considerably higher. And for residential care, which is out-of-home care, they range between $455,480 and $881,113 per annum per child. That's from the Productivity Commission. That's the money that these organisations get paid. Now, that's high needs children, but this is why children with disability are often targeted as well in that system. But that alone, you've got to also imagine that it's not just that, that's just the out-of-home care payment. That's just the contract arrangement between the state and these out-of-home care providers. That doesn't include the NDIS funding. It doesn't include all the money that's made through the judicial system, all the money that's made through all of the attendant arms there, the psychologists that give the interviews for the children's courts, all of these other people coming in. You're talking millions and millions of dollars. Coming back to...
Billions.
Yeah, coming back to Russell's case, how many police, Graham, do you remember how many police were involved in putting this case
together?
There's
68 on the witness list.
68 police on this case, and all kinds of information gathered and reconnaissance. Entrapment would be the word I'd use. They tried to entrap them as well, creating all kinds of things. But when you talk about this many police engaged in this kind of activity, this is a multi-million / almost like billion-dollar exercise.
But they can't find, they haven't got the resources to be able to find mandatory reporters.
Yeah.
And Julia, it's all because no one acted, the police did not act in the first instance on the child abuse reports.
Yeah.
If just those few police officers did their goddamn jobs, none of this would ever happen. Millions, tens of millions would be saved.
A lot of the time, what I hear throughout this case, through reading some of the documents and other cases that have very similar patterns, is that they say that the children are being coached. They also dismiss anything that the children disclose because the child's lying or something like that. Now, I know, Dee, that you've got a history in film directing and you've worked with children, and children have acted as well. So can you see, and is it easy for you to tell whether a child is lying or telling the truth?
When you get children of 13 and above, they're now getting into puberty, they're becoming more sophisticated. But when you've got children, and I've seen and heard a lot of interviews, when a child speaks out for an hour and a half, and then 2 years before spoke out in an hour, and there is absolutely no way that child could ever have been coached. The questions are not leading. You cannot, a child can't sustain more than a couple of minutes of a lie, and a good investigator will immediately know after about a minute and a half whether the child's coached. And there's a study, Palmer and Milne, very esteemed study, saying that children only about 1.5 1 to 1.5% of children's disclosures are lies, and they're usually to a third party, not to an investigator. So when a psychologist or when a reporter, there's no reason for the child to lie. There is no reason for a parent, a protective parent, to coach a child that doesn't even know what they're talking about, because you can see it. They don't even know what's happening to them because they don't understand the sexual context.
And the level of detail that the child is able to
that's right.
Are we able to, just for the public, I think it's really important, because that's something that really hit home for me right to the core, is actually knowing what the child is actually disclosing. Are we able to perhaps give an example of some of the sexual abuse that
I could talk about another case, not this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, give an example, and I'll give another one.
Yeah, one lady that contacted me with a child that was taken off her, I think at about 3 years of age, and given into out-of-home care, and she was able to get that child back some number of years later, 3 years later, and lost near all contact, and got the child back into her care, and the child made disclosures then, but those disclosures included these people sitting on top of this young child, defecating on them, cutting their penis with a razor, and other disgusting, atrocious things, and shoving their penises in his mouth and all kinds of things. And they were the most shocking disclosures. I actually talked about it on another radio show, because I've seen a number of these things now. And we've had other ones, and it will be too confronting for people. I mean, on Facebook will most probably block you if I continue with these stories. But they're horrific, you know. I'm not saying that's not relevant to Russell's case. Russell's case is different. I don't know the details with the
a lot. There's I know in that case there was, you know, the kids were bleeding out the anus and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just horrific. It's horrific. Yeah,
it was horrific reports of anal bleeding and genital
disease. And the kind of things kids will say, they'll say, "Oh, I'm forced to drink yucky white stuff, and I don't know what it tastes like," and this kind. You know, I mean, you can't even describe the horrendous. And the courts just sit there as if this is just business as usual. This is, and that's why I have no room for courts anymore.
Yeah, Dee, that thing about, I remember one judge, but this was a number of kids that didn't know each other and never connected. And the judge didn't believe the allegation, and I sort of thought of it straight away. And I thought, what are they not thinking? You know, what are the judges not thinking? Because the child had said that he cut her backside with a knife.
Yes, so that
a number of children said that. And he said, "That's ridiculous. People don't do that." And I said, "No, they probably didn't." But what I'd say, there was a number of children all made the same allegation that didn't know each other. I said they didn't do it. It didn't happen. What happened, I would think, they were shown a knife. They were threatened with a knife. They knew that if a knife cuts you, you bleed. They knew that. They're only little. They're only 5 years old, 6 years old. And then after they're shown the knife, they're threatened with the knife. They know what a knife does to you. Then they're only raped. And what do they think? They think that's a knife. Because they've got no experience. You see? So that should have been questioned in court, and it never ever was.
No, and that story, it's interesting with that, because I published an account of that, and then I was approached at least by 5 to 7 people, some adults, that came up with the same story and were never believed by police. So none of them knew the other people, and they'd all reported it independently.
Yeah, and because it did sound fanciful, because that's not what happened. They were shown a knife. They were threatened with a knife. They knew a knife makes you bleed. They didn't know anything about sex. They were too young. Then they're only raped. What's the first thing you do? You think of the knife, and you think of the pain, you think of the blood. So when they're asked, "What happened to you?" "I was cut with a knife."
But the terrible thing about this, Julia, is that the courts treat this stuff business as usual, and the protective parent is punished. And in this case, in Operation Noetic, the protective parents, the protective doctor, the protective people that try to protect these children who are still with their abusers are the ones being punished. It's almost unbelievable, unless you realize that we're living in a cult that operates the courts and that systematically abuses and psychologically abuses protectors.
There was independent clinicians in the court. Who are they? There was a whole bunch of them. I saw a letter from them that they even raised their concerns about the stuff with the twins in this case, and they all got ousted, and none of that information was presented to the court. It was astounding. What do they call them? The independent? Are they psychologists? What are the independent?
The independent report writers and.
Yeah, there was 4 of them assigned to the case for these children, and they all said that they didn't believe the mother was grooming the children. They had no reason to believe that. They believed everything the children said, and they were really distressed about what was going on in the courts. And they kind of got ousted and got ignored in this case, in this very case. So,
what
and Dr.
Really, this is very political, very, very political. A lot of money. Someone very high up is pulling strings. And there's people, names have been mentioned to me that are related to certain people and this and that. I remember Heffernan tabling 28 names or something in Parliament. It was all thing. But just anecdotally, because I've no evidence of this, but I believe the solicitor who told me this, he says that last year he was at a party. He met a woman who claimed she was a caseworker. I have no doubt he was told this. Whether he was told the truth, I don't know. But he was told this, and she said she was interviewing the kids, these particular kids in Noetic when they were about 5, and an ex-prime minister come on the screen, and one of the kids pointed to him and referred to him as uncle and said that they were taken to him regularly. Now, I believe that's probably true, because even though I've heard it third hand, but I believe it's probably true because I've seen the level of what appears to be political indifference and interference. And there has to be a reason for that political indifference and interference. I think it's very high up. The solicitor actually said what you've uncovered is bullet in the back of the head staff, and he's running, I believe he's a bit scared. I'm philosophical about it. I believe it's probably bullet in the back of the head staff, but whose head and whose bullet? So I'm not particularly worried,
So, can we just talk a little bit about Russell Pridgeon, because he's, in my eyes, from what I can tell, a real hero and a protector of these children, along with the other individuals. And what I see is that because he's actually taken in the twins and looked after them, I think it was for like a year or so. And these children were, it was, I'm not sure how much I can say, but like these children, they had a few years of rehabilitation in a way, right? And then they went back to the abuser again. And then another thing that I want to point out for those that may not be aware is that the media are painting him to be exactly what the reports are saying. There is no one reporting, or I guess it just sounds like a massive cover-up from all levels. It's almost hard to believe, because it's, how big this actually is.
Since I've known Russell, I would stake my life on Russell. He's a good man. He's lost everything. He's lost everything. He's lost all his substantial savings, his superannuation. He lost his medical practice for a number of years because the AFP went to the medical board and said, look what he's charged. We didn't make a comment. Look at this. And they all worked in together. He lost his practice until about 3 years later, when he went to the Court of Appeal in New South Wales last year, and the Court of Appeal ruled that the medical board had no power to suspend his licence, and he's back practising. But now what they're trying to do is drag him into what they say is a 12-week trial, 25-week trial, without letting them know the evidence against him. We say it'll be a 1 or 2 year trial, and he's going to lose this medical practice as well. They've got nowhere to live, no money to live on. And the charges are, not just the charges are a beat up, the indictment's invalid. The indictment is 100% invalid. There's a hearing on it in several weeks' time.
February the 8th.
If you want, I can just explain briefly why the indictment's invalid.
Yep, please do.
Okay, the indictment doesn't contain any particulars. So, for example, the conspiracy charge, count 1, there's 2 conspiracy charges, count 1 and count 2. It says that Russell Pridgeon, Patrick O'Day, and it lists all the people, conspired judicial power of the Commonwealth, and the judicial power was the family court. That's what it says. Okay. For people who don't understand the law, that's invalid. right? For 400 years, the law has stated, and I can show you cases from 1824 in USA that are quoting cases from England in 1700. I could show you in 2005 in the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal in Jansesky versus Regina. I could show you in John L. Motors in the High Court in 1992, where they all say the same thing, that an indictment must oppose to the factual particulars, including the time, place, and manner of offence. And this indictment does not speak of the manner of offence. So it says, it doesn't say how they conspired. It doesn't say how they perverted justice. It should say something like, based on their current particulars, it should say something like, did conspire together to pervert the course of justice by taking and hiding the children and thereby preventing the court from hearing the case until the children were found. That's what it should say. In relation to the carriage service charges, it says that Patrick O'Day, Queensland and elsewhere, did use a carriage service which a reasonable person would find offensive. It doesn't state what sort of carriage service. How's he supposed to defend this? It doesn't say whether it's a postal letter. It doesn't say if it's on the internet. It doesn't say anything. Now, they've given all of these particulars later, right? But it doesn't matter. They must be in that indictment because the purpose of an indictment is to convey jurisdiction to a court. They're 100% invalid. And their response to very reasoned submissions was, you didn't say what particulars are in it. That's it, one line. That's their response to the court. Well, there's no particulars in it. Right? So the indictment is invalid because it doesn't have particulars. Secondly, the Family Law Court Act 121, subsection 8 says that for an offence against that section, for a prosecution for an offence against this section must be signed personally by the director or authorised by the director to be signed for and on her behalf. Now, he committed in the trial on one, she consented to one, which is hidden in that. Well, that's duplicity. That's another whole story. They did not have consents for those other two. They claim we don't have to, even though they concede that the words an offence means one offence. So they didn't have consents for that. They had consents for the conspiracy charges, but they're on a certain set of particulars which were dealt with in the committal. And in 1937 or 1938, I think 1938, in ex parte level, re Buckley in the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal, Justice Dixon, who became a High Court judge, stated, it is the particulars that constitute the charge. So therefore, it seems to me to be logical that if you go to committal on a certain set of particulars, you're committed on those particulars, and then later those particulars change and therefore the charges change, how can it be said that consent for the indictment is current and valid today when it's a different charge altogether? Right. So that's that position. So there's a number of attacks against this indictment, which are all based in case law, and there's a hearing on the 8th of February. If they push through with this, they're just disregarding the entire law. Now, these people took an appeal to the Queensland Criminal Appeal, Court of Appeal, and what they said was you can't have an appeal because the rule says that there's no appeals from interlocutory judgments. But we showed case law that showed that there was a judicial exception to that rule if it was the only court you could go to, if you would lose the force of the appeal. Right, we're always saying, well, if you force them to trial, they lose the force of appeal to stop the trial. And if it doesn't run on the merits of the case. And we said all of these were within this judicial exception. You must hear this appeal. The judge wouldn't hear that. She just ignored it. So I actually spoke up, and I wasn't part of the court case. I spoke up on the phone, and I said, what about Coco versus the Queen? And she said, silence. And I said, but Coco versus the Queen is about statutory interpretation. And what you're doing, you are going to impute into this ruling, into this legislation, that a person can have an unfair trial, right? You need to interpret it along the lines of Coco. She said, it's a very important ruling now, silence your phone. And she already had the judgment prepared.
Yeah, before.
Just
She would
read
do
the
what she was
judgment
going to
out.
do before she came out into the court.
And then they said, well, can we have a judicial review? We can have a judicial review, surely, if we can't have an appeal. And her exact words were, yeah, you can apply for a judicial review, but you may not get heard.
You need to understand too, Julia, with this case. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of people wouldn't be aware, but they got a what's called a software brief. Whenever you're in a case and you're criminally charged, basically, this is how it goes in our democratic or alleged democratic system. You get a brief of evidence. The brief of evidence, the BOE, brief of evidence, is the evidence that the prosecution is relying on to ground your case. And every person has a right to know what they've been charged with and what they've been accused of. So in this case, the brief of evidence, you get it in these books, and they'll give you a folder with a whole bunch of things, with a court attendance notice and what you've been charged with, and a statement of facts and evidence and statements from police and everything. And you get this folder, and that's the evidence against you. With all of these people, they got what's called a software brief. They got it on a USB stick, and it was over 80 gigabytes in size, and none of them could access it. It had locks on it, so you couldn't get into it, you couldn't work it. It was made in later versions of software they didn't have. They were technically compromised. Russell has some computing skills, but fundamental, and had very little. So they could not even access the evidence being used against them, and it was massive, this 80 gigabyte brief of evidence. And we actually did find in that 5,000 pictures taken from under a road with a camera taken just off the road from under a car. 5,000 pictures of just a car under the road, a road. In that brief, it was padded out with all kinds of things. So no, they couldn't navigate that thing to say, well, what is it that I've done? And even now, today, they still don't. And
Wow.
there was one person publicly, I can't remember who it was, Graham, and I remembered, somebody put the maths together on 80 gigabytes, and they worked out if they printed it out, it would be 2 Pantech trucks full of paperwork, right? 2 massive Pantechs full of pallets of paperwork. So these people, they don't even know the actual case against them. They got joined up with people they don't even know. Some of these people didn't even know each other. So they're a part of a child trafficking syndicate that don't even know who they are, which is a ludicrous concept, because the syndicate you would think would know who each other was. Yeah. These concepts, a grandmother who had lawful custody of her child at the time, a grandchild at the time, so you cannot possibly harbour or steal a child if you were given lawful custody. The only reason she couldn't get back to the family court was because the police arrested her. They stopped her from getting to court. They conspired to defeat justice. So this is complete projection. It's complete and utter hypocrisy. It's a multi-million, squillion-dollar bullshit story, right? Persecuting these people. And, just as an aside, it just so happens that Patrick O'Day and Russell Pridgeon also started the anti-pedophile party in this country some years back.
2016, I believe.
But not long before they were charged. Yeah. So that's the anti-pedophile party as well. So, just as an interesting aside, as well.
And all their associates that were associated with the party were tracked and traced.
Yeah.
Bear in mind that, I just lost my train of thought. When they charged them, one judge actually recently just said, why didn't you just charge them with contempt of court? Oh, well, that's a matter for you. Well, when the original charge came, it was for breaching a court order. And what we said was the family court has primacy. And I rang a QC up, who's recognised as one of the top 2 family law court QCs in Australia. And he told me, he said, yes, they have primacy. So it was a breach of an order. And when you breach an order, you either have a breach with a reasonable excuse or a breach without a reasonable excuse. And if you have a breach with a reasonable excuse, as they did, and they were charged with contempt, then they could rely on Section 70 NAE. Also in Queensland, Section 286 of the Criminal Code, or the Crimes Act, I think it is, and it says that it's an offence not to do something to protect the child, blah, blah, blah. And they won't even let them use those defences. They said, you can't use those defences. Right?
Yeah, like they don't even have the right to protect children. It's just like, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's like, since when?
The amazing thing in all of this, Paul, for me, is the children have no voice in this. No. The protectors are taken to court. Why aren't they bringing the children? Why didn't someone go into the children and say what actually happened?
They never do.
It's almost like, it's like, I mean, this is really Salem witch trial stuff. If you drown, you tie the person on a thing, and if they drown, oh,
They're
they must
not-
be innocent,
they're
but
not
they're
a
dead.
witch.
And if they rise to the surface, oh, you must be guilty and you got to be executed. There is no way this government, and we include other Western governments, but this Operation Noetic is absolute proof that there is no logic, there is no rationality in the protection of children. The whole system is to abuse children, and anyone who goes out to protect children will be decimated.
Targeted.
And
yeah.
my position is very, very clear that the common law in this country, and I actually wrote this in a letter to the judge, and the judge in this case, they're getting pretty upset with us writing them letters, but we
They are, yeah.
And what I pointed out that in Walton versus Gardner, the High Court stated that if a court does not act to protect its processor from abuse, they are no longer operating as courts. So what my position is, well, that's the common law in this country. They're not protecting their processors, so they're no longer operating as courts. We don't need to obey them.
Yeah,
We don't need to obey the children's courts. We don't need to obey the family court, and we certainly don't need to obey any criminal court in Queensland, in my view, because they're not the common law. This is the common law of this country. It says if they don't act to protect themselves from abuse, they're no longer operating as courts. That's what the High Court said.
And they've all signed the rights of the rights of the child. Article 3: all organisations concerned with children should work towards the best for what's best for the child. I mean, you can't even begin. We're dealing with people that are, as Graham says, they're working in a different frequency. But I think there's a case of that the elite in the courts and everything, they're mentally ill. They have no understanding of what they're doing.
Have we heard any updates from the children, like where they are? Are they okay? Are they still alive?
They're supposed to be self-harming. All
The
sorts of
twins
problems
is not
I've
the
heard.
twins. Is,
I've only heard it third hand, but
I've only heard third hand, but not really poorly about the twins.
And
it's been a long
what the
time now.
listeners
This has
need to
gone
know,
on for years.
Paul, you would back me up on this. What the listeners need to know, this is Operation Noetic, yes, but you've spoken to the children's courts and the foster care, which is all connected anyway. They're coming after your kids, okay? They're coming after all of them, okay? And you need to know that. And once they get a child into foster care, for example, and these kids aren't doing well, so it's a similar, very close correlation. All the reports show, and while my figures mightn't be 100%, they'll be close to 90% right. All the reports show that once a child goes into foster care, for example, and you people that haven't lost your kids yet, they're coming after them, trust me. And this is not just Australia, this is England, it's Sweden, it's Norway, it's everywhere, it's all over the Western world. It's why they're fighting Putin, he won't be a part of it. So he's not a part of their system, and that's why they're after Putin. I'm not saying Putin's an angel, he's ex-KGB, he's probably murdered heaps of people, but he's a born-again Christian and he won't be a part of this. So once they take your children, if they get them under 10, they'll break the bonds. Once they break the bonds, any decent psychologist will tell you that their bonds can never bond again.
Never again.
So they cannot bond with their own children. They can't bond even with their wife when they get married.
Yeah.
They're educationally disadvantaged at 50 to 70%. They go to prison at something like 70% greater rates. They have children out of wedlock at something like 70% greater rates. They're 6 times more likely to be murdered in foster care than in the home, even with the worst of parents. They're 6 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. They're 15 times more likely to be physically assaulted. All of this stuff happens. And yet the Children's Acts in every state of this country and in America and in England and in Sweden, Norway, and every country all say that when the courts decide whether the child goes into foster care or back with the parents, he must take into the best interests of the child. But they never, ever, ever weigh up what the parents are accused of doing with the absolute guaranteed outcome. Right? Now, a friend of mine who's a very smart man who's been looking into people's heads for 70 years, he said to me that the system that they're running is the same system that Hitler ran. And he said Hitler did it for a different reason, but that's where he got the SS, and they'd kill their own grandmother. And he said these people end up killing their own grandmothers. And about 2 weeks later, this is only 2 years ago, the state government put out a call for people to leave their jobs and get 70 to 80,000 a year to look after the troubled kids because they're creating their own SS. And they don't care. They don't care how many families they destroy because it's all about money. This is 5 billion just in Australia, but that's without all the add-ons.
It's actually 7.5 as of 2022.
It's demonic, it's evil, right? And I won't brook anything with them. No, you know, I'll have nothing to do with these courts. I'll have nothing to do with whatever they do. I've had people tell me you got to obey laws and this and that, but when it comes down to family, my position's very clear. If some bloke rushed in, didn't know who he was, he's scraggly, got a raincoat on to be the stereotypical type, and he's dragging my grandson away, then I'm going to step in and I'm going to bury an axe in his head. If he's got a badge on or a nameplate, it ain't going to make no difference. He's still going to get an axe buried in his head, right? So my position is I'm going to protect because that's what my job is. What other people do is their business, but this is evil. And this is corruption on steroids. And I was born up, I grew up in the 70s. I saw corruption. I know what corruption is. And back in the 70s, the entire New South Wales government was a crime family. And it was controlled by the Premier Askin and then the next premiers, and it was a crime family. And anybody that knew what it was and was involved in it, you could get jobs, you could buy yourself out of charges, you could do anything, you know, anything. And that's not a joke. And yet, I'm telling you, I saw corruption on steroids, but we could have learnt from these people. We were rank amateurs. Rank amateurs.
The thing too, Julia, is that like the average person goes, oh, well, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to affect me. But this net is getting wider and wider. And again, I've got another quote here. This is again Productivity Commission 21-22. This is the government's own records available at www.pc.gov.au. So this is authoritative reporting on numbers. But they said during 2020-2021, right, this is as a report on children, 293,585 children, this is in Australia, were the subject of notifications to child protection departments. That's 51.9 notifications per 1,000 children. So that's 5.1% of all children in Australia have been the subject of notifications. That doesn't mean they've been taken by the department, but that means that they've already come into their life in some capacity. 105,407 children were the subject of a finalised investigation. Right, so that's, you're looking at these, if you start looking at these percentages and the figures like that, and this every year this is growing almost like exponentially. So it's only a matter of time before it's going to affect you and your children.
But
and this is what
the interesting thing, Julia, that in the same Palmer and Milne study, it is declared that Australia is the #1 country of child abuse of young women. I don't know what
children. It's female
and
children.
It's the highest rate in the world. And you know, if you think about all the men in jail, I would say 85% of them have been abused as children.
There was a man recently in New South Wales. He's a serving prisoner, pleaded guilty to murder, and he murdered another prisoner a couple of years ago. He just pleaded guilty to it. And what he said was, he told him straight up, and they said, why'd you do? He went and he cut his throat with a prison-made knife. And he said, because he was skiting about the kids he raped, and he said, and I was fiddled with as a child, and I won't have that. It's as simple as that. I won't have that. He was in jail because his life was destroyed because that's what happened to him. But the whole system, people need to realise in 2017 or 18 in Queensland, 50% of all children taken were taken on the grounds of emotional abuse, which under their act can be one raised voice argument without violence between the parents in front of the kids, one, and that's enough. And so it's so wide, that they're and it's like if you've got a chicken shop, you know, Mr. Barter started here as a school project with a dozen chickens and grew it into a monstrous big business. Bayada bought it out, mixed up with Steggles, all of that. So what happened? They open up shops. Chicken becomes cheaper than meat, than red meat. they need more and more chickens. So what do? They build more sheds and they get more chickens. And they say, hang on, we've got bigger orders. We need more chickens. We need more chickens. They're looking for the foster carers before they take the children. I can't prove that, but I know that. They're looking for they're filling the positions and they need more chickens. They need more chickens.
Yeah.
Well, out-of-home care is 100% privatised, I think.
It's 100% privatised, so the department now removes children. They don't look after the children. They pass them off to these departments. There was a period of time in the case of the child in my case, and it's still going on now, there was many of those children were being kept in motels. The child in my case was kept in a motel for a year and a half. I went into that motel. There was an entire floor hired by the department at the time, FACS they called themselves at the time. And the entire floor was full of children that had been removed, mainly with disabilities. There was one elderly woman in one room and she had 3 babies that had been taken at birth from families at the John Hunter Hospital she was looking after.
We know of cases, don't we, where they put the child, the old lady that was older than the grandmother, older than the great-grandmother, and she had the child in a dog cage.
Yeah, in a dog cage.
But they wouldn't give it to the grandmother or great-grandmother.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it's indescribably despicable. I've lost all.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm over it. I mean, I'm
absolutely at our wits' end. And if Operation Noetic continues, the government should be actually expunged because the system is so corrupt, so debased in the most evil intentions that it's beyond comprehension. And I hope your audience start understanding that there's no limit to this.
Julia, in 2010, I first heard of this out-of-home care before it became in, because I had a friend who was on the poll, so I was involved in an Aboriginal corporation that had 6 members. My friend set this up, and it was for the benefit of the members and their families, and it was set up in such a way there could only be 6 and no more, although he changed and let a few others in later. And he came to me and he said, there's going to be millions to be made. They're going to privatise out-of-home care. This before anyone knew about it, right? And me, being like anyone else, I thought, wow, that's good. That's good for the kids. Like poor little kids need help. Yeah, what's your plan? He said, well, we're going to meeting with 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and we're going to meeting with FACS. And we're going to be accredited. We're going to join forces with Anglicare, who in my region alone got 96 million 2 years ago for the year. That's one not for profit, 96 million. That's without Catholic Care, Uniting Care, all the others, right? And that's all that, and then you got them all over the thing. 96 million just here. So anyway, they came down and we had a meeting. And I thought, yeah, this is good. We do social good and we make a lot of money in the process, and we accredited with them for 1 year, and then they're going to give us 30 kids to foster out to people, and we'll make $30,000 a kid. That's $900,000 a year. We're going to make initially the 6 of us. That's 150 grand each. Well, we're all set for life. Until he put the video up, and he scrolled through, and I believe I got a good mind and I got a good retentive memory. And he scrolled. I said, hang on, put it back. I want to see what was up there. What's that? He said, what? I said, it's the units, the monetary units up there. You're speaking of monetary units. What are they? He said, that's nothing. That's just accountant talk. And he went off. This is a bloke from FACS. And I said, no, go back. Right. And the other people said, don't worry about it. I said, I am worried about it. I want to know. If I'm going to get involved in something, I want to know what I'm getting involved in. Put it back. I said, what are those monetary units? He said, they're the children. At that point, my friends will find out probably now, because they'll find out what happened. I went to the bishop, was gone from the church, but I went to the administrator of the church and I said, we can have no part of this. I can have no part of this. And this is evil. So the first thing he did was he lifted the phone to Anglicare and said, why did you walk into our diocese? Don't ever walk into our diocese again without telling us. And we started an argument with them, and I got out of it. And they went on with it, but 6 months later that, they were all arguing amongst each other, but I couldn't have any part of it. And they just scrolled through, what are the units? Why won't you tell me? Just tell me what the units are. What are they? I want to know. If I'm dealing in money, I want to know what they are. And
well, it's what it is.
They're the children. In fact, FACS website, doesn't it, Paul? FACS website actually
website, I downloaded a link from that because they called the children financial units on their website. That's what they did. I don't know if they still are, because we highlighted it and showed it in court. So quite often they take those things down and change them once you bring attention to things. Yeah,
Military units.
It's a shocking state of affairs, Julia, because it's so in people's faces they don't realise. Like I said, I think I was telling you when we last spoke, you know, every children's court's a closed court in this country. Children's court, youth courts, they call them in some states and territories. They've got different names and different, but they're for the children's courts. They're all closed. They close these courts, and we're supposed to be in an open justice system, and it's like they argue that these courts are all closed to protect children. It's not to protect the children. It's to protect the people removing the children. The children are at much higher risk because no one can talk about them. And these courts are everywhere. There's one 15 minutes from here in Newcastle. There's a number of them here, Central Coast, Woy. They're around. These courts are right. There'll be one near you.
And the social thing, the social damage, women killing themselves, but it's not just the fact of women and killing themselves. You take a mother, you take a husband and wife who have done nothing wrong. And even if they've done a little wrong, they've had a few arguments or whatever, the Act says, you know, children aren't taking, you take an AVR and stuff like that. They might need, even when they need counselling, the children are going to be much worse off once they're gone. But they take those children, what's the first thing that happens? They're in a tight rental market. They're paying exorbitant rents, like around here, sort of $580 a week and $450 a week and all of that. But they're surviving because they've got their little family unit and they're getting some sort of money for the free kids, child endowment, it used to be called. And all of a sudden, those kids are gone and all the money goes into foster care, and these people's income, it's not just the mental strain that they go through. They just lost their kids, but they've lost... They're gone. Their lives are over. So they turn to drugs. They turn to violence. They turn to alcohol. Where do they go? Privatised prison system. They lose their jobs because they can no longer cope. Where do they go? A privatised job search place, right? Who, you know, Mr. Rudd's wife sold out her interest in her privatised job search thing for 300 and something million. So they're destroying families.
Yeah, they're destroying society.
Yeah. You know, and this is much worse than what we're saying here. It's much, much, much worse than that. They're evil. They're demonic. I've seen firsthand. You know, I don't want to say too much, but 6 years ago, I first met these people, and I just get off my property and don't come back, and we're going to have a major, major drama here. And you know, if you want to come around like a child's not even breathing, not even born yet, and you want to come around bloody causing trouble and making up lies, well, I can tell you now, whatever you do to my family, I'll do double back to yours. So off and go. And they don't like me, but I don't like them.
Sounds like that's the type of stand that you have to take. Otherwise, they'll just completely walk all over you and
fundamental.
And just, I got to ask, like, is there any good people left in the system?
I don't believe so.
Few and far between. I mean, we've been looking for, you know, when you talk about good people in courts.
I mean, like in courts, yeah.
Yeah, if you're talking about, you know, solicitors and barristers, very, very hard. I'd say that it's not zero, but it's low. You know, I'd say you might find 1 in 100 with some degree of integrity, but the system's a failure. Complete and total failure.
When it comes to children's services, and there's great judges in the New South Wales Court of Appeal and all of that, and I think there's some great judges in there. But it seems to me that when it comes to children's courts, you aren't going to win.
No.
You're not going to win.
No,
you don't win.
And the amazing thing is, you know, you get a magistrate that has got a good reputation in a magistrate's court, and then they go to the children's court or the youth court, and they become despicable people. All rationality, you know, evaporates from their mind, and they make the most illogical and irrational and despicable outcome, where, in literally Salem witch trial stuff, where
I've seen it too. It's out of control. No, people they wouldn't believe it, and the problem
they wouldn't believe
we see it because we've been in those courts, but we're the last vestige of individuals that are in there. I think Dee and myself, there wouldn't be many around that have been into these courts and seen this, because I'm a pastor. I get in there. They've kicked me out a number of times because they close the courts off. They do everything they can now to get me out. They don't want me in the court. They don't want us in the court. They don't want anyone reporting on it because it is that disgusting. These are not courts. The children's courts are not courts.
Yeah, and they buy opinion. So, you know, in the one case, they'll buy a psychiatrist to come back and declare that the mother's got a delusional disorder. And then in the transcript, you see the guy, the psychiatrist say, oh, no, she hasn't. But the magistrate just goes along with, she's got a delusion disorder. I mean, it is just absolutely, you can't believe what's going on.
And is there an issue that I'm curious about, because once they take away the child and the family and the mother can't actually go public with it, is that because of the suppression laws?
Yeah, in New South Wales it's 105, but there's other laws in states and territories, and 121 is the one on the federal level with the family court. So yeah, effectively the suppression laws are in place such that you cannot talk about a child the minute a child's removed. So I know New South Wales well because I'm in New South Wales, but 105 stops. That's what I'm challenging now on its way to the High Court, because we've argued that 105, that they argue is to protect the privacy and identity of a child, very much like they do with the Children's Court by hiding the identities. And I'm saying, well, it's actually not true. It also has another purpose, very clear purpose, which it actually protects the privacy and identity of the people that remove the children. So there's no protections for children at all. And it's enabling abuse. So once the child's taken, there's nothing you can do to help that child. If that
you won't get them back.
And the court will blatantly say, if you expose the corruption of the police officer, you'll go to jail for 2 years. I mean, come on, give us a break.
I mean, the
you
first
should be given a medal for exposing corruption.
But those people have lost, if they've lost their kids, I'm telling them, they're not getting them back. Right? Maybe one here and there. I'd be surprised if one here or there. My thing, going to a lawyer is not going to help. If you've got an asset, you won't have any when it's finished. You won't have any kids or assets.
No, this Christmas for me was a turning point, Julia, because I got a whole number of calls. One mum says they've taken my kid because I didn't get back into South Australia in time because I wasn't allowed back. It was lockdown. I wasn't allowed back in South Australia. And I was on the phone call. And she said, well, you didn't come back. The social worker says, well, you didn't come back. Well, I wrote to you. I wasn't allowed to come back. It doesn't matter. That child is gone. And it's just, I can't even describe how the protective mothers tell something. Or, even if it's protective father, they'll make the wrong decision. They'll make the wrong decision.
I get them too, nearly on a daily level. Like, can I show you one really quick one, Julia?
Please.
Just one very quick email. I won't say the name of the person to protect her, but this was yesterday, right? So this is a daily occurrence, and I get calls as well. But this one, I read about how you took on facts, now DCJ, because they've seen me in the media a little bit, and I wanted to share my story of being blindsided by DCJ. That's here in New South Wales, the facts docs. 2 of my 3 boys have autism and the others complex needs. First trigger, because they're worth more money. Right? They were never abused or neglected. DCJ used my PTSD diagnosis from years of DV, domestic violence, as the reason to remove all of my children. That's classic. They have ignored me, the boy's father, who they were not removed from, but DCJ refused to allow him to be the carer. That's quite common too. And have placed them with someone with a drug and alcohol problem and a criminal record. That's what they do too. They give the children to people with criminal records all the time. They then use the excuse that my other 3 children were in care to forcibly remove my newborn girl at less than 19 hours old. So they'd already taken 3 of the children. They then took the newborn child off her at 19 hours old, right? The caseworkers have committed perjury, this is what they do all the time, and have told us we are never going to see or get our children back. They say that all the time too. Right? Nothing we do matters. The system is not okay. And she goes on and more. Now, this is one example. This happens. Dee gets these all the time. I get them all the time. We get these every week from people, one after another, like some fucking ridiculous stuck record from these child-stealing maggots. And you do get to a point where you've had enough. And this is where the fundamental common law thing comes in. Is the only thing we can do, Julia, is to encourage parents to not allow these child-stealing maggot departments into their homes under any circumstances, and if necessary, to use all force that's reasonable, up to and including lethal force if you absolutely have to. That's the bottom line.
I would temper that by saying, people also need, if they come calling on you, need to keep your temper in check. Because when people lose their temper and they get angry and they start yelling, they say things they don't like, you've got to be nice and calm. So they come there, for example, and they say, oh, we've had a report. Well, the first question, who made the report? And the answer will be, we can't tell you. And the answer to that is no, because the report that you just told me is false, and under the Act, I'm entitled to know if it's a false report. I need to know who the person is. Under you go and read your own Act. Can't remember the section, but if it's not in good faith, you're entitled to know who it is. Secondly, you only have jurisdiction in 2 issues, and people should bear this in mind. You know, you only have jurisdiction in 2 issues. Either you have to prove there's no parent or caregiver willing and able to take care, and you know, you come in here with that the charges that you're levelling, they're not enough. They're not enough to say that. Or you have to show the child's at a significant risk of harm, and the Supreme Court has stated it has that significant risk of significant harm. The Supreme Court of New South Wales ruled that has to be an unreasonable risk. Okay, because every child is at a risk of significant harm. If you're living up on the hill across the road from me, you could have a snake come in. That's a risk of harm. Do you remove the child? No, because it's a reasonable risk, right? So, my position is people should just say to them, well, your charges are false, and you're only allowed to investigate, right? It says the Act in New South Wales says that they can carry out an investigation by any means, right? What I said to them was 6 years ago, I said, by any means whatsoever? They said yes. I said, can you go down and get a heap of painters and dockers armed with shotguns and bust into my house? She said no. I said, so when it says any means, it means any legal means, doesn't it? She said yes. So we'll have a right to privacy. Okay, and my right to privacy trumps your trumped up charges, and you're not coming in. It's as simple as that. And people get scared and bluffed, and she said, I'll get the police. I said, no, you won't, I will. And I did. And the police officer said to me, I'll make a report on this. He said, it'll all be on record. Thank you for coming in. And she said, I'll get a magistrate. I said, no, well, that's next after the police, I'll go to the magistrate. And I did. I went to the registrar. Told him. I said, this is a game they're playing, but they won't play it with me. I'm telling you, there's going to be an issue here. It's a big bad one. And eventually, yeah, they terrorized me for 8 months. 8 months. And the level of terror from them got so great that my response drew in the anti-terror department.
Yeah.
Who backed me? All senior police backed me. They said, you're right, they're wrong. And what's going to happen if they do what they say they're going to do? I said, well, I'll do what I said I was going to do. Right? You deal with me later, but you can't stop me from doing. I never got upset. I never yelled. I never screamed. You can't.
It's important.
You can deal with me after. You can't deal with me before. They touch a member of my family, I'm going to react very, very poorly, and it's not going to be a pretty scene. They don't have the law on their side. They don't have truth on their side, and they're terrorising my family. They terrorised the family over in a major city near me. A good Catholic family. They terrorised them for 8 months as well. And the Catholic father told me, not that long ago, he said they were still being counselled a year later, the entire family. That's how badly they terrorised them, because they wouldn't let them in the house. They said, you are not coming in the house. And they just kept coming back. Right? Because if they go into the house, okay, I know of a case where they went into a house, and by all accounts, you could eat your food off the floor. A young single mother, and you could eat the food off the floor. And she was playing cutout dolls with the little baby, you know, when you push them out like that. So the report was that the house was messy. I know of another case where they said, we'll get you a coffee table and a TV. And people told her, don't take the coffee table, don't take the TV. She said, well, no, give it to me for free. Don't take it, right? So she took it, they delivered it, they set it up for her. And the next day they came back with facts. They said, why, we got to buy you a coffee table and TV. Are you wasting your money on drugs? If they went into Buckingham Palace, they'd complain about the corgis.
And what they'll do, Julie, is they'll take children on any excuse.
Anything.
And then if that's proved wrong in court later, it's too late. They will invent something else.
Or they'll say they're bonded. I know of a case in New South Wales, an actual case where 2 years later, the magistrate ruled that the children should never have been taken, ever. That they had no grounds whatsoever, but the court case just mentioned. And he said, and the mother should have the children back. The problem is the children were so young when they're taken, they're now bonded with the foster carer, so they can't go back.
That's actually quite common. It happened in another case I was only dealing with a number of weeks ago. And you've got to remember, Julia, that in New South Wales, I'm sure it wouldn't be different in any other states and territories, but to get to what they call establishment, which is the actual determination of why the child was removed in the first place, can now take up to 2 years. So it can be up to 2 years before, and in that time you've got very limited contact with your child. It can vary, but can quite often be as little as 2 hours a month or 30 minutes on Zoom during COVID. That's all the contact they get. They get next to no contact with their own biological children. It can take up to 2 years to get to establishment, and by then they'll do exactly what Graham says. They'll say, look, well, it was wrong, we should never have taken the child in the first place, but the child's now been 2 years with these foster carers and other people, and they've bonded with the new carers, and it wouldn't be right to give them back. So you're not getting them back anyway. You're not getting your children back.
And
this is why. Sorry, Dee, you go.
Yep. No, and then there was another case of this mum had her 3 kids taken, and the kids fought like hell. They ran away. They did not want to get returned to their abusive father, and this esteemed psychiatrist wrote the report and said, "Look, it's best that they stay with the abuser, because if they go back to the mum, they're going to get strength back and refuse to go back again." It's like, who invented this stuff?
Yeah.
As far as I can see, even if these children aren't, I'm speaking to everyone that's watching and everyone that might watch later on, even if these children are not related to you, they're not biologically your children, we are all responsible for them. Because it affects all of us, and it will eventually if we don't start taking action. So whether that's just researching this information yourself, start taking action, asking questions, putting pressure back on the system, whatever it takes.
I'd like to see everyone going into children's courts and just making inquiries at registrars and going to see what's happening. So I'd like to see what happens in these courts.
I would like Nuremberg trials to start. Yeah. And these people face child abuse, the real child abuse charges. You remove a child from a loving parent, you go to jail. Yeah. You go to jail. If you falsely remove that, I really want that to happen.
And that's the bottom line, Julia, too. I know Graham wants to speak, but you should never remove a child from a family that loves them. And this happens time and time again. If they love their children, they quite often do need help. A lot of parents do need help and support. That's a fact. There's a lot of people struggling for lots of reasons. But if they love their children, you never take their children off them. And they do this all the time.
My position's really, really clear. I mean, if you've got a child that for 6 years now, and he's only been sick once, and the only time he got sick, he got a really high temperature, give him some Panadol, and he shook it off, and a surgeon friend later tells you that, explains that because of this happened, that his experience tells him that whatever virus attacked him was really, really bad, life-threatening. When he shook it off in half an hour, that means he's got a really robust. He said, whatever you're doing, keep doing. You know. So my position is, if you've got a child he's emotionally balanced, he's intelligent, he's hit every milestone, he's greatly loved, and he's told he's greatly loved every day, and all of his potential is tried to be brought out in him, and at the same time letting him be a little kid. And he's always well dressed, and his clothes are always washed, and his food's always clean. What's it matter if you've got a cluttered house or something? You know, if a child's like that, and they, we got a problem. No, your problem is you want to milk everybody to put into your system. And if you come along, and a parent knows, or a grandparent in my case knows 100% that there is not a problem, that the child is not at a risk. And they're not after me, but they're after everyone else. But although, incidentally, a friend of mine asked some bikies recently, some Lebanese bikies, if they've ever come after them, and they burst out laughing, you know, because they won't go near them either.
They won't go near them, yeah.
But the point is that if you know the child is protected, you know the child is loved, you know the child is growing, you know, and even if you can identify problems and you need a little bit of help, they're the last people you should be getting help from, right? The very last. Find a decent church or something, you'd be better off, as much as they're heretical, but they're the last people. But if you know you know, and you know that your child or grandchild, as that I do, I know that he's perfectly happy. I know he's healthy. I know he's content. I know he's loved. I know his potential is all being met. All his needs and most of his wants are being met. Nearly all of his wants, but not all, because he got limited money. But all of his needs are being met. And I know what happens if they got him. Then, you know, if that ever happened, you'll read about it in every paper in the world, what the result was of that. Because you cannot, in my view, hand a child over to Satan. You can't. You simply can't.
And the other thing about this, Julian, in foster care, I know I've heard a number of cases from foster parents. If you start if those children start forming an attachment, a love attachment with those foster parents, they will remove them snappily.
Yeah, the foster
because don't give them don't give them love, just give them what they need.
Yeah, and why do you think that there was a fund woman asking for funds recently to buy suitcases for these poor little kids in foster care so they didn't have to carry around their possessions in black plastic bags? And my mate Don, the old bloke I spoke of earlier, he wrote up, he said, doesn't seem real caring giving their stuff in plastic bags. But the reason all of these kids, when they move house, they all go with black or, you know, plastic bags, garbage bags. Why? To instill into their minds that they're garbage, their possessions are garbage, because it's to destroy them.
It's to destroy any attachment, any love attachment from the previous home. The whole system should be completely thrown out. Everyone that has prosecuted these cases should never work with children again. There is an army of Schadenfreude, that means people who get joy out of harming others. There's an army of women, an army, and you know, that are 𝐓𝐡𝐞 comes in. You know, it just keeps coming in.
It's reminding me, Dee. This has been going for so long. When I was about 10 or 12 or 14, probably about 14, and my father, he never had a lot of money, but he was a very smart man. He made a lot of money, big money. And I remember as a kid, big money. I mean, we're driving a $10,800 car when houses were $8,000, you know, and money was nothing. Mum would buy $300 dresses and this and that. And when people were earning $150 a week, Mum would buy 2 or 3 dresses a week, you know, sometimes different times, whatever. We'll go to the races, buy a new dress, not every week, but buy a new dress. We had lots of money. Dad would hop in a plane and fly to Sydney to get his trousers made at Ruben F. Scarf's and stuff like that, you know, wouldn't buy off the rack. We had that much money, didn't know what to do with it. And Dad went to a priest. Dad's not a religious man, but he went to a priest and he said, listen, he said, I got that much money. He said, I don't know what to do with it. He said, if you want to send in, my father's a good man. And my grandfather, none of our family had ever been accused of hurting a kid. And he said, you want to send me 3 or 4? I don't care. I've got a nice house. Send me 3 or 4 kids for Christmas that have got nowhere to go, that, you know, in care or whatever. And he said, I can't do much for them, but he said, I'll make sure they've got the best Christmas they've ever had. They'll never forget. I've got relations with farms. We can take them out and show them the sheep. We can do this. We can do that. They never even got back to him. So that's how long this has been going. You know, he was a man offering, you won't have to pay for anything. I'll pay for their fares. You know, I just want to try and do some good in the world. And all my family, we're all good people. Okay, we, you know, maybe some of our business activities might decry that, but we were decent moral people towards innocent people, and yeah, they never even got back to him.
I mean, I actually sort of, you know, had an epiphany last year, the end of last year, thinking this is because I kept on thinking, you know, we can win this, but and I do believe we can, but it's like we've been fighting. This is the sacrifice of children, just like they did in, you know, the Mayan temples or whatever. What's actually going on is that it's just unbelievable.
And
the illogicality.
Right,
so what's that, Paul?
I said it's right under everyone's noses. This is thing. It's not some mythical thing with them in tunnels. I mean, that might be happening, but it's not this thing that the QAnon go on about, like buried away here and there. I mean, that may be going on too. I'm not saying it's not, but this is right under your noses. This is every children's court in this country.
Right. I was talking to a police officer just the other day, and I said to him straight out, I said, you know, we're talking about different things, and I said to the police officer, 2 police officers, and I said, yeah, them. You know, we got onto that subject, and I said, they're child traffickers. And They're just not. It's a child trafficking, right? They're evil and demonic, and then nothing good can be said of them. But the stigma, so people don't, you know, when it happens to them, they think they're the only, oh, what have I done wrong? No, in 90% of the case, or 95%, I would think you've done nothing wrong.
Done nothing wrong.
And on that note, Graham, Paul, Dee, I think we're just being conscious of time. I just want to thank you so much for doing all you do. It's incredible, and coming on to tonight and sharing this information with people that might have absolutely no idea. And can I please just encourage, if you don't know what to do, how you want to help, please share this out to this information to anyone. Start talking about it with your neighbours, family,
If
friends.
possible, could you put the link to? If possible, could you put the link to?
I'll give you the link to. There's a fundraiser for Russell's case.
Yes.
We're getting funds together, but more importantly, even than that, I mean, that's important. We very rarely fundraise, but we're trying to get counsel, and that, or we have got counsel, because we feel it important. But we've got a one-day event on February the 8th at the Brisbane District Court, which is Russell Pridgeon, Patrick O'Day, GREER and others. That case, there's an attempt where we're attempting to stay or
invalidate the indictment.
Invalidate the indictment. It's technical questions of law, but we're arguing a whole bunch of things there, and I'm actually going to that as well, flying up, or maybe
I'll
driving.
see you there.
But yeah, I think that's really important. February the 8th is must be the most important one to support them. There's other things happening too, but we'll keep you in the loop. But just to support specific events that might be helpful. Aside from that, just educate yourself, like you're saying, Julia, and spread the word, spread videos like this, and go and check out these children's courts we're talking about. Go and see for yourself.
And for people who, you know, the last thing I'd say, this is a spiritual war. Don't think that this is flesh and blood war. This is a spiritual war. And, you know, I would say to people, read the Bible and have a look what's happening in the world. It's all happening, everything they said, because the Bible's real. Jesus did die on the cross. He is coming back. And you need to pick a side. If you haven't picked one yet, atheism won't get you through this. Islam won't get you through this. There's only one that's going to get you through this. You got to pick a side, and the side is Jesus Christ.
And what I'll also be doing as well is after this video is finished, I'll be uploading this to BitChute and Rumble for those that aren't on Facebook. So stay tuned. I will post links about basically a lot of the things that we've been speaking about. And what else? I think that's everything. Yeah, just thank you again, and thank you everyone for tuning in. It's really, really important that we get this out there, and we'll be in touch and hopefully see you guys soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you, Julia.
Thanks for having us.
Julia.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Very good.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.